Hi there, I'm Rosemary Barton. Here's what's at issue this week. The Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mélanie Joly, hinted at Ottawa's new strategy for Indo-Pacific relations, something she and the Prime Minister will flesh out in the week ahead. Part of the strategy is addressing the tensions between China, Canada, and the rest of the world.
China's rise as a global actor is reshaping the strategic outlook of every state in the region, including Canada.
But this change in strategy is too late, according to the official opposition.
I think it's very troubling that the Prime Minister has known about allegations of foreign interference in Canadian elections since last January, and he hasn't taken any action.
So what's to be made in this shift, and how does this fit into the larger policy changes we are seeing? Let's bring in at issue Chantal Hebert, Elamin, Abdelmahmoud, Althia, and Andrew Coyne. Good to see everyone. Althia, I'm going to start with you this week. What do you make of the way the government is approaching this? First of all, I guess the need for a strategy when it comes to this part of the world, and then some of the shifts here in terms of dealing with China.
Well, we needed to have a strategy. Our allies all have a strategy. I think the criticism of it being kind of past due is a reasonable one. It is interesting that it has taken so much time for the government to put it forward. Our understanding is that the bureaucrats basically presented it to Foreign Affairs Minister Mélanie Joly in the spring, and then she was really surprised to find that it didn't mention China. And so basically formed her own committee and has been working across departments. Apparently there's 9 departments involved in this to develop the strategy. It includes 30 initiatives, but that they wouldn't announce it before they are leaving on the strip this evening, Thursday, is a little bit surprising. I think what is probably more interesting politically is that there seems to be tension between Mélanie Joly's vision of the world and what Canada should be pursuing, and Chrystia Freeland's version of the world. The Foreign Affairs Minister is not a fan of the term decoupling. In fact, believes that we shouldn't just trade with democracies. That we obviously want progressive ideals included in our trade, but that we can't shut ourselves from the world. And so, if you're looking in terms of political tensions, I think that's probably the most interesting angle.
Yeah, and François-Philippe Champagne, the other person that uses that language around decoupling from the Chinese economy. Andrew, I see you nodding your head there, so I'll go to you next.
Well, we're watching the slowly dawning awareness of this government way late in the game that maybe we don't want to have normal trade relations or otherwise with China, the country that is committing genocide within its own borders, that has been squeezing the life out of Hong Kong and is threatening to invade Taiwan. And of course, is also engaged in all kinds of espionage and shenanigans overseas, including in this country, and these troubling recent reports adding to previous reports of them overtly interfering in Canadian elections. So it's remarkable that it's taken them this long to produce an Indo-Pacific strategy paper. It's particularly remarkable that until about 5 minutes ago, there was no mention of China in it, which tells you yet again there's something deeply wrong at Global Affairs with the advice that ministers are getting. But yes, when she finally does come out with this statement, it is noteworthy the degree to which it departs from some of the stronger language recently adopted by some of her cabinet colleagues. So, as I say, this government is very much a work in progress in terms of its understanding and willingness to grapple with the threat that China poses. But I suppose you give them marks for improvement.
And why do you think this is happening now, Chantal? And what do you make of the coherence of the messages from around the cabinet table?
Well, it does paper over some of the cracks, if you technically want to go there. Decoupling from Russia and China is what François-Philippe Champagne and Chrystia Freeland are advocating. And this goes in the same direction. I can't imagine how it would have looked if they'd come out with a strategy that didn't mention China in the current circumstances. But what I think is happening is they're piggybacking the Ukraine-Russia conflict to move very slowly, I agree with Andrew, towards decoupling and towards this notion. Maybe not that you make it a test of democratic countries, because you're going to run into problems really quickly once you get into that. But at least that they're moving away from the notion that trade is all good and it doesn't impact on foreign policy.
Yeah. I interviewed Minister Champagne for my show on Sunday, and it does seem to Elamin as though much of this is driven by the United States and the fact that they are making this kind of shift away from China too. And if we want to have any kind of competitive edge, we kind of have to do the same thing.
Right. I mean, calling this a new China strategy is relatively inspired in the sense that it assumes that we had an old one. We've been acting for the last couple of years out of a place of emergency, right? We've been acting out of emergency when it comes to China, whether it's the fact that they are our second biggest trade partner, or whether it's the fact that we've been trying to resolve the two Michaels crisis. So it's been out of a place of emergency in terms of trying to respond to that. Having said that, having gotten through some of those emergencies, I think it is logical that the next step is try to articulate some kind of vision. As Althia said, it is politically interesting that there is some kind of division about the role that Canada is meant to play in the world. Like, there are maybe some elements of this cabinet that still believe in an old version of liberalism, perhaps one that, we kind of articulated most clearly pre-pandemic, but since then has been a little bit in flux, especially after Ukraine has been a little bit in flux. Mm-hmm. It is interesting that this debate is playing out in public, because you would think that this is a kind of thing that would take place behind closed doors, but we are kind of getting a bit of a preview about what that debate might look like.
Chantal, yep.
So let's be clear here. It wasn't just pre-pandemic. It starts with Jean Chrétien and the Team Canada trips and this notion that it's all good if everyone is on board that plane to just carry more business with China. And it continues with Justin Trudeau coming to power, wanting more of that. Mm-hmm. And it takes forever, and all these crises, which are really astounding, to come up with a policy paper that recognizes basically what is reality. And that is closer to how Stephen Harper saw this than how Justin Trudeau saw it in 2015.
Okay, Andrew.
And it's not just about trade. There were theories in liberal circles not so long ago that China was the rising power, that America was fading, and it was important for Canada to kind of get in good with the new king in town. I think that was amateurish in the extreme, neglected rather important things like human rights, and it's taken a series of blows, a series of extraordinarily bad behavior by China to finally shake them out of it. And I don't doubt that somewhere in global affairs, there's still people saying, look, this will all blow over. Why are we making such a big deal out of, Taiwan?
It does seem as though, to your point, I think, Althia, that Minister Joly, and I think she pointed to this, like Secretary Blinken, has a desire for a diplomatic relationship to exist, but is at the same time warning businesses that they enter into relationships with China at their peril. Does that make sense to you in terms of a messaging from a foreign affairs minister?
Absolutely. I mean, I think what everybody is saying is that Canada, this government, has had a huge wake-up call after the Michaels incident. And it's probably something that they should have been aware to for the past generation, 3 decades. China has been exerting its influence across the globe, buying up natural resources in Africa, building infrastructure in Asia. And the United States, Europe, Canada didn't really pay that much attention to what was going on. And so, yes, in light of what's happened, there is a new recognition that we can't also, I think, speak from both sides of our mouth, which is frankly, I think, what was happening a little bit with the Stephen Harper government. The rhetoric was there against China in terms of human rights. But when you looked at deepening of trade relationships, that's also something the government wanted to pursue. And so I don't think it's wrong for Mélanie Joly to say that, when it comes to the environment, we want to continue to engage, but also tell businesses recognize that there are geopolitical risks in China, and perhaps, which is frankly something businesses are already doing, they are investing in other countries in Southeast Asia.
Okay, very quickly, Chantal. Very quickly, Chantal, then I got to go.
Yeah, well, we're a long, long way from when Jean Chrétien would line up all the contracts that were signed with businesses in China and say how successful this Canada trip was. Now, let's be clear here. What has been debunked is the notion that prosperity means democracy. And that was the rationale that was put on offer, that as China became richer, it would become more democratic. there were plenty of examples that wasn't true, but they were convenient to ignore.
Doug Ford has now backed down from using the notwithstanding clause to prevent education workers from striking.
We're going to do it. We're keeping our word. We're going to do it. You got to give and take in negotiations. You can't be hardcore. You can't be running out there and spiking the football and doing cartwheels. We aren't doing that. We just want the kids in class.
So what does Doug Ford's reversal mean? Is this the last we're going to see of this measure? I somehow doubt it. Chantal Hebert, Elamin, Abdelmahmoud, Althia Raj, Andrew Coyne are back. Elamin, why don't you start us off? What did you make of the backtrack, and what do you think it says, if anything, about on the Ontario government's approach to using this tactic?
I think my brows are furrowed because I'm, watching that clip of Doug Ford and thinking, I don't know what is more hardcore. What is more doing cartwheels than using the notwithstanding clause to negotiations with the union? I honestly, it was I think the most remarkable part of last week has been seeing all of the unions standing beside one another on one stage saying, like, this is not okay. That was a truly remarkable move that I think I haven't seen from Canadian Labour in some time. I think if Doug Ford has anyone to, I guess, how might I try to put this? I think I would say that Doug Ford deserves maybe a thank you present from the NDP for reawakening the labor movement and its importance in this country, because clearly so overstepped his bounds that a lot of factors that were not together came together to say, you know what, this is not okay. Like, that's the system kind of working.
But it's one thing to succumb to the pressure, and I agree with you, Elamin, overwhelming pressure from labor, Chantal, but is there a message here, or is there a lesson here that was learned by his government or other provincial governments, or are we just going to end up in this conversation 6 months from now?
We will not end up in this conversation over labor rights, is the first takeaway from this. It had been a lifelong dream of many Conservatives to use this clause on a labor conflict, and what better chance to do it than with schools closing? And the message is don't, because you're going to end up looking like a fool and embarrassed, as Premier Ford did when he had to say, oh, it's all off the table. Does that mean it ends the debate on the notwithstanding clause and whether you should use it preemptively? I don't believe that it does. And possibly it has set back the cause of those who would have wanted more clarity by a reference to the Supreme Court. Because with the issue fading off the radar, if you're not going to be acting now, you maybe won't be acting ever.
Andrew.
Well, that's hard to know. I mean, I agree with Chantal that this has certainly set the precedent that if you use the notwithstanding clause against labor, against organized labor, you are going to face a big fight and probably not going to win it. And that was certainly demonstrated by Ford was basically staring down the barrel of a general strike, which is illegal, but everybody had sort of crossed those lines in the last few days before that. But it's not at all clear that governments will tremble to use a notwithstanding clause where the cause is more popular and where there isn't such an organized interest against you. So, for example, Muslims in Quebec, for example, aren't going to be able to muster the kind of firepower that the union movement could. So that suggests to me that this issue is not going away, that there are governments and there are Conservatives, large C and small c, who are quite determined to use the notwithstanding clause. Doug Ford himself said previously he was going to use it routinely, that they would like to use it to basically delegitimize the charter. And I would not be at all surprised to see a Scott Moe or a Danielle Smith using it when it suited them, when they thought they could get away with it. And then I think we'll be back into this question again.
Well, and the fact that it was labor and in part private unions as well, from private businesses coming and saying to Doug Ford, please don't do this. It does show you, I think, too, Althia, that money has an influence, right, on government decision to do this. And so I wonder if there's other instances where that would play in, because as Andrew points out, it's not going to be religious minorities that are able to use that kind of leverage against a provincial government.
I don't think it was money. I think it was the fear of having a general strike in Ontario and possibly
lack
spread
of money,
across
shutting
the country.
Down the economy.
Okay. That, scared the bejesus out of them. I'm with Andrew on this. I'm not convinced that Ford that the premier actually even understands what he unleashed. I mean, you listening to his 3 press conferences this week, he called the notwithstanding clause a tool. He said, what's worse than using the notwithstanding clause is a legal strike. He said he was not ruling out using it again. This tells me that he doesn't actually understand what he unleashed. And so many people around him seem bewildered by the response, well, Quebec used it for Bill 21 and Bill 96, and there wasn't this outcry from the public, and there wasn't this outcry from Ottawa. And they're not wrong to say that, because the federal government, Justin Trudeau, the prime minister, did not respond in the same way to Bill 21, to Bill 96, as he did in this case. And part of it is the fact that there is no election around the corner. And part of it is that union movement across the country were united against this. And part of it is that it's a nice wedge issue against Pierre Poilievre, who's dressed himself as a freedom fighter and then was unwilling to say that what Premier Ford was doing with regards to charter rights was wrong. But the federal government has lost the desire to act quickly. And so I don't think, unless another premier decides to use this shortly, that we're actually going to see much action from Ottawa. What they're talking about at the moment is just to introduce a motion that would not get unanimous consent in the chamber.
Right. Andrew, I can feel you want in there, yeah.
Oh, I was nodding along, agreeing that I would simply add that the other reason they didn't confront in Quebec is because it's in Quebec, and people don't like to tangle with Quebec on these issues.
Yeah,
and that is not a good look for a federal government to be picking and choosing which provinces it's going to stand up for fundamental rights in.
Chantal.
One way or another, the issue of the notwithstanding clause and how it is used will end up in the Supreme Court. But yes, the federal government could have sped this up, and I'm not sure that they will at this point, because Ford backed off.
10 seconds, Elamin.
I think that they should still do it. But
Yeah.
I'm not convinced that they have the political will to go there. And there's no guarantee that they'll like, or Andrew or Althia will like the answer.
Also true.
Last word, Elamin, very quickly.
Well, perhaps another person who should send Doug Ford a bottle of wine is Justin Trudeau, because like this, if we are to take the case that Quebec is the best example of the use of notwithstanding clause, which appears to be at least the government's position in terms of not actively stepping in the middle of it, this might be a case of what it looks like when it's a bad faith use of the notwithstanding clause. So suddenly the government has a particular case to point to say we need to at least limit these kinds of uses of it. And then suddenly we have an away team. Suddenly we have something to push against. And that's, I think, if anything, useful for the federal government to finally step in.
Okay, I got to leave it there for this week. Thank you all. I appreciate it. All very smart talk, as usual.